The opposite of discouragement. The dictionary definition is to give confidence, courage, or hope. And we can often do that with words. There's a story of a group of frogs who were traveling through a forest, and it was new territory to them. And as they were traveling, two of them fell into a hole, a pit, beside the pathway. And it was an older one and a younger one. And as they tried to jump out, it was just deep enough they couldn't quite jump free of this pit. And the other frogs gathered around the edge and were looking down in, and they were saying, it's too deep. You're not going to make it. You can't get out. And the two frogs were trying, and soon the younger frog took the people's advice, or the other frogs, they weren't people, sorry. He took their advice to heart, realizing that he could not get out. He laid down in the corner and died. He gave up. The other older frog kept jumping, and he actually jumped higher. And the frogs around the edge kept shouting louder. Say, you can't make it. You might as well give up. It's too far. It's not going to happen. And the higher he jumped, the louder they got. And all of a sudden, you know what? He jumped right out of that hole. And the other frogs gathered around him and were saying, how did you do that? What happened? Didn't you hear us tell you that it was useless to try because we could tell you weren't going to be able to get out? And he said, oh, is that what you're saying? He said, my hearing isn't as good as it used to be. And he said, I heard you shouting. I just assumed you were cheering me on. And that spurred him on to jump higher. Sometimes our words can have negative effect. Sometimes they can have positive effect. And when they do have positive effect, we can encourage each other. And I'm not talking about flattery. I'm talking encouragement in what is God doing in my life? How has God blessed me this past week, this past month? What has He brought me through this past year? What have I learned from this? So for our text, we'll read Romans 1, verses 8 through 12. But verse 12 is really where I want to key in on. Romans 1, beginning in verse 8. And this is Paul is writing to the Romans, the church at Rome. And the heading here, verse 8, in my Bible says, longing to go to Rome. He had wanted to visit them. Verse 8, it says, first I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all the world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of His Son, that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers, asking that somehow, by God's will, I may now at last succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. Paul was saying here, he wanted to come to them. First of all, we notice in verse 9 and 10 there, he's saying that I've been praying for you. He said without ceasing, constantly praying for them, for the church there. And he wants to come visit them. And then in verse 11, he says, for I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. And I can picture, I guess I can't really picture, but we can let our imagination go, and we can maybe get a small idea of some of the stories that Paul would have shared as he visited these places. Think of all the things he had been through, the beatings, the whippings, the prison, breaking out of jail and prison, the shipwrecks, all this stuff that he had encountered in his journeys, in his adventures for Christ, for spreading the gospel. What an interesting speaker he would be to come and share about what God is doing all over the world, what God is accomplishing. But even though I would assume he would have been an interesting speaker, probably would have packed the church house, to come hear of his adventures and things, he says in verse 12, he says that we may be mutually encouraged. Mutually encouraged. He says, by each other's faith, both yours and mine. He wanted to be encouraged by them too. He wanted to hear what God has been doing in their life and how God has been leading them, what has been happening for them. He wanted to be encouraged by hearing what they have to share. It's not just a one-way street. He wanted there to be a two-way street, and that's kind of what I wanted to key in on, is that each of us has something to share. Each of us, whether it's individually, I know some of us don't enjoy speaking publicly in front of a crowd, and it's even worse thinking about that it's getting broadcasted anywhere and everywhere possibly. But I think it's important that we continue to share what God is doing right now. It came up a little bit in our Sunday school class this morning, discussing is the world in worse shape than it was however many years ago? What are we facing? I think we need to proclaim the Word of God, and I mean the Word of God definitely more, but our personal experiences too, sharing the victories of what I have been dealing with and working through and facing, how God is bringing me through that. In 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 11, it says, therefore encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing. Another church that Paul was writing to, giving them encouragement, saying, keep building each other up. Keep sharing among yourselves what God is doing. Give God the glory and share what he's doing. That is encouraging. That will be encouraging to each other. That will get us to be mutually encouraged. It takes all of us to work together. There's a story of a pastor who was asked to go preach at a visiting or at a neighboring church for a Sunday evening service. And he went, he took his young son with him, and he had, it was the first time he had been at that specific church, so he wanted to go a little bit early. So him and his son got there a little bit early, and they were some of the first ones there. And they walked in. As they walked in, there was an offering box out in the foyer, and he opened his wallet, and he had a $5 bill, a $10 bill, and a $20 bill. And being a visiting pastor, he thought, well, I should put something in. He put the $5 bill in, closed his wallet back, put it in his pocket, and they went on into the church, him and his son. His son had observed all this. As people started showing up, it was a little bit, I think, kind of like our Sunday evenings here are sometimes. It wasn't very, very well attended. It looked different than it does Sunday mornings. But some people showed up, and he got up and he gave the message. And then as everything was done, as they were leaving, the local pastor, he said, oh, hey, by the way, he said, what we normally do is we give what's in the offering box to our visiting speaker. So he went over and opened the offering box, and he was somewhat embarrassed to find only a $5 bill in there. But he handed it to the visiting pastor. He said, well, this is for you. And him and his son left. Well, on the way home, the pastor was thinking about this. He said, I only got $5, and it was the exact same $5 I put in. And his son, who, as if he could have read his father's thoughts, said, you know, Dad, I was thinking, if you would have put more in, you would have got more out. And as pastors are always looking for illustrations, I thought, you know, that is a good illustration of our spiritual life, of our church life. And I'm not talking about money. He challenged his home congregation with How much are you putting in? Are you getting out more than you put in or less than you put in? Do you show up for Sunday school having studied your lesson, being ready to share? Or do you expect the teacher and the superintendent to have all the thoughts and to spoon feed it to you? Do you enter worship time already in the heart and mind of worship? Or do you depend on the worship leader to lead the right songs that will guide you into the spirit of worship? Are you excited and ready to share what God is doing in your life currently? Or are you hoping to get encouragement from the pastor or others who share? If you leave church consistently every Sunday feeling empty, I would challenge you with the same thing this young boy said, is if you would have put more in, maybe you would have got more out of it. I don't necessarily want to step on anybody's toes, but I think it's important that we are open and willing to share. If God is laying something on your heart, if God has brought something in your life this past week, share it. Share it with the rest of us. We want to hear it too. And we give God the glory for those moments. I had something happen to me earlier this week. I had to do an interview. I do not enjoy giving my thoughts and comments when I know they're being recorded. It's bad enough doing this when I have a chance to study, and I still make tons of mistakes, but at least I know what I'm going to say for the most part. But when you're on the spot and in an interview, I just do not enjoy that. But anyway, I had to do that this week. And during the interview, it's concerning the coffee shop, and during the interview, the man that was asking the questions, he kind of asked what we attribute to the growth of Main Street. And I said, well, first of all, we give God the glory for what it is, and the people around it. I forget what my exact answer was, but the point I want to make is after the interview, he went on and asked some more questions and stuff. But then out on the street, I didn't know if this guy was a believer or not. Couldn't necessarily tell right off the bat. But out on the sidewalk, he said, I appreciate you sharing your faith and giving God the glory. And he went off on a tangent saying how he is a believer, he's a Christian, and that he sees so many people that he knows, that he's, or at least knows of, talking on social media and on LinkedIn, these different places, bragging about what they have accomplished in their business, what they're doing. And he said, we all need to give God the glory. We all need to do better at that. And he said he even called out some of those people, and that he's a pretty outspoken guy. But I had an interesting conversation. He said that he was encouraged by what I said, but I was encouraged from what he told me, the encouragement that he gave me. And just him being willing to share that with me was a super encouragement. I had a smile on my face. I felt better about it after he'd shared that with me. I think it's very important that we are willing that we're not apologetic of what God is doing. God is doing good things. We shouldn't hide it, as the song says, hide it under a bushel. We should let it show, let it shine. So that is my challenge, I guess, to give you some homework. If you don't have, we're going to turn the time over to Joe Shetler. He's, like I said, he's chomping at the bit. He's excited about something. I don't know what he's going to share, but I think it'll be an encouragement. And then we'll open it up after that for you all to share. If you don't have something today, I guess I'll give you some homework, a challenge. Be looking in the next week, in the next couple of weeks, look for those moments that God is doing something in your life that you can come and be excited and share to the rest of us so that we can rejoice with you and join in with that. Okay, Joe, go ahead.